Hello and welcome to our little box of crochet technique videos. This time we're going to be making the very beautiful Betty beret, designed for us by Susan Crawford and made using her beautiful, absolutely exclusive to Little Box of Crochet at the moment, walled yarn, a unique blend of Southdown, Blueface Leicester and Shetland fleeces, grown, sheared, dyed, spun, the whole works here in the UK. So gorgeous yarn, we're very lucky to have it, and as beautiful as it is looking like this, I always hate this part because what we've got to do is take it out of these incredible skeins and wind it into balls. So before you do anything at all, do that and we'll be ready to get started. Ta-da! As if by magic, here is that aforementioned luxury exclusive to us yarn, all wound and ready to work. Now you can see that the cream yarn is, the cake is smaller than the others. That's intentional, you don't need quite as much of that, so don't worry, yours will be the same. Even if you kind of wind it by hand into a ball, it's not a problem, that will work in exactly the same way. I've just used my Swift and yarn winder here. If you're thinking that premium yarn that comes in skeins is the way forward, I'd heartily recommend investing in one of those because it feels fab when you're winding it and it saves loads of time. Anyway, moving on. So we know that we've got luxury yarn here. I keep banging on about it, but it's really important because this box is all about this yarn. It is lovely to be able to use luxury yarn if you're making something to wear, I always think, because it's special, isn't it? You put a lot of time into it, and now you're putting some really good quality yarn into it as well. It's a sort of a special thing, so I hope you really like the project. If you've been gifted this box, perhaps, or if you are early on in your crochet, I don't want to say journey, I hate that, but I'm going to have to, crochet journey, this is a great project because it isn't terribly complex in the construction, but it, again, as I said, it creates something to wear, and it's something very lovely to wear as well. It's also a great thing to make for a gift because it won't take you too long, but it will look super impressive. So all in, tremendous. Shall we get started? Right, we're ready to start. Now we're starting with 4 chains, so I've just made a slip knot and put it onto my hook there, and I'm going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3 and 4, and what we're making here is the centre or the crown of the beret. So obviously we need to make a circle, and the way we're going to make that circle is we're going to make all the trebles that we need for this round into our chain, and we're going to make them into the very first chain at the bottom right near the slip stitch. So in Susan's pattern she says miss 3 chains or skip 3 chains and make all those trebles into the first chain that we've made. So that's the one right where I'm pinching with my thumb and middle finger there. So I'm going to put my hook, so yarn around the hook, put my hook through that chain, pull up, yarn over through 2, yarn over through 2, and that is my first treble made. I'm going to stop at this point and remind you that we are working here with UK terminology. Some of our overseas folks will know that to them what I've just made is not a treble, it is in fact a double, but in the UK we call that a treble, and I'm going to be using UK terminology throughout, so just to remind there in case that sort of confuses anybody. Okay, so I'm ready to put my next treble in exactly the same place, and as I work this round, I've got quite a lot to go in here. I've got 15 to put in here in total. So I work them round, that little stitch might loosen a bit, but don't worry because we can tighten it up at the end and it'll be absolutely fine. So that's number 2. I'm now doing number 3. And while I work round these, I want to just have a word with you about the 3 chain, because when we move to the next round or sort of start making trebles, we often start with 3 chain. We kind of have with this right at the beginning here, we're just using the bottom chain for something else. Your designers will always tell you whether those 3 chain count as a stitch or don't. And it doesn't have to be 3 chain, it could be 1 chain, 2 chain, whatever it is. Your designer will always tell you whether you're to count that as a stitch or whether it's just there to get you going and you ignore it. In our pattern, in our Betty beret, we will count those 3 chains as a stitch each and every time. So just remember that when you're going back to doing your counting at the end of your rounds to to see if you're ready to move on to the next one. Okay, I'm going to carry on working these. Fluff has come off and made my nose itch. We need 16 in total, including that beginning chain. So I'm going to carry on working these and I'll see you in a minute. Right, okay, so I'm now on the last treble right into the middle, and as you can see, like I said, that chain that we're working them into has opened up a little bit, but that's okay, don't worry about it. I'm going to give the end a little pull, gentle pull, because this is all wool, it breaks really easily, so try not to do it because you will not be happy if you break it off and have to rejoin and start again. Okay, so we've made 15 treble into that first chain, and that makes a really beautiful, even and lovely center point for your crown of your beret. Going forward in all our rounds, when we get to the end like this, we are going to close with a slip stitch into the top of the kind of beginning chain. So I'm just going to go through and close with a slip stitch. So now you can see, if I move that out of the way, very neat and lovely way to start circular crochet, isn't it? I really like that. Anyway, enough of admiring, let's move on. So as mentioned, we're going to start our rounds with 3 trebles, and they're going to count as 1 stitch. So not 3 trebles, sorry, 3 chains, and they're going to count as our first stitch. So 1, 2 and 3. That is going to count as our first treble. All right. So for round 2, we're going to increase our stitches because we need to keep this kind of relatively flat and growing out. So to do that, we need more stitches than we've got here. And to do that, we're going to do some increases just by putting more than 1 treble into some of our stitches. So we're going to start that by putting 2 treble into our next stitch. Okay, so there's 1. And there's 2, so 2 going into 1. All right, and that pattern is going to happen all the way around this circle. So I've got 1 by itself, then 2 together, 1 by itself, then 2 together. So let's do that. So 1 in the next stitch, and then 2 in the one after that. So there's my rhythm: 1 2 1 2 1 2. I want to say cha-cha-cha, but I'm not going to. So it's 1 2 all the way around this circle. And what that will give us is, it will give us enough stitches that our circle can grow outwards without curling, and it will yeah, just grow our circle. So 1 2 all the way around. I'll see you at the end. Okay, I'm now putting my last stitch in, and I'm going to I would count, I've just counted so I know it's right, but before I close off with a slip stitch, but I know there's enough there, so I'm just going to close with a slip stitch so we can have a little look at what's going on here. So you can see that I've got a little bit of curl going on, but don't worry, we're going to block this later. You can see my crown is growing outward because we've increased our stitches as we go around the edge, which is absolutely lovely. Little tip here, if you're counting, I mean it's up to you, but if you're counting trebles, I always find it easier to count the actual posts rather than around the top. It's entirely up to you, of course. I usually do that when we're using chains to count as a stitch. I don't know why, it's more accurate for me. But you, dear darling viewer, must do exactly as you like. Right, okay, we're going to do exactly the same again now. In fact, we are going to increase in precisely the same way that we did on that last round, which is to say 1 2 1 2 1 2 all the way around. So let's just get going, just to remind ourselves. Our first treble is actually that 3 chain, isn't it? Okay, so that's our first stitch to all intents and purposes. So in our next stitch going round, we are going to be putting 2 treble. Okay, and those are the real McCoy stitches wise, okay, and that's the same as what we've just done. So going all the way around the edge. Whoops. At this point, before we started this round, we should have had 24 stitches, and at the end of this round we will have increased by half as much again, and we'll be up to 36 stitches. So there's a good amount of maths in crochet, and I like that. I can hear you swearing. Right, I'm going to do that all the way around. You don't need to watch me doing that. It's the increase is precisely the same as the one in the previous round. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, all the way around. So see you again at the end. Right, I am on the last stitch. So this is stitch number 36. I've counted them. And full disclosure, I'd made a mistake, so I had to take it back a bit earlier. I had messed up the rhythm of 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can tell how good I am at dancing, can't you? And I'd done 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, and that had thrown everything out. So yes, it is simple in its construction, but it doesn't mean that you can take that for granted like I just did. Learn from my mistakes, chaps. Right, so I'm going to close here again with a slip stitch. Wanted to mention actually, just to by the by, we're hanging out together. Have you when you work this, you're going to notice, which I always find miraculous, as you work pure wool, it starts to really soften up. It starts with that sort of familiar kind of you know, that familiar sort of rougher feel that wool has, proper wool has, and it's already, as I'm working the crown of this beret, it's already softening up, which is just incredible really. I love that. I do like working with natural fibres. They behave completely differently obviously to man-made fibres. They adapt in their environment where man-made fibres don't. So lovely luxury, this one. Right. Do you know what, chaps? It's the same thing again, pretty much, although our rhythm of stitches changes in round 4. We're not going to increase at quite the same frequency this time. We went from 24 to 36 stitches in the last round, which meant we increased every other stitch. On this next round, we're only going to go up by 12 stitches again, so not half as much again, just 12 stitches, a third as much again, which means what we want to do is actually have one single stitch increase, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, all the way around. That sounds a bit waltzy to me, so I'll probably get that all wrong as well. So our old familiar 3 chain to start, that counts as our first treble, as you know. And instead of going straight into an increase here, so instead of putting 2 trebles into this stitch, I'm just going to put 1 into it. Okay, and then our increase happens in the next stitch. So the third stitch around gets our increase. 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, all the way around. And again, little tip if you are new to crocheting or not, that's how I remember a lot of my work, really, a lot of my crochet work. I try and give it a little rhythm of stitches, and then I don't have to keep referring back to my pattern. It does backfire, as I've just told you, but that was me not paying attention. That was me watching the cat walk past, truthfully. So 1, 1, 2 all the way around, and we should, with a fair wind and a bit of maths, end up with 48 stitches at the end. So I'll see you there. Alright, I'm on my last stitch, and here's another little tip for you. You can generally tell if you got it right, because your last stitch should be an increase. Okay, so the last stitch of the first 4 rounds should be an increase. So if you're finishing up and you're not on an increase, which is what happened to me on round, I can't remember whether it's 2 or 3, then just go back and double check, because you'll have made a little mistake somewhere. So there we go. That is, we're getting at the end of round 4, which means we're going to say goodbye to moss for a bit. We're going to move on to buttermilk. It's not cream, it's buttermilk, people. Terrible at not calling things that look vaguely cream. Right, so we've finished round 4, and I want to show you a completely optional, not compulsory way of joining your yarn when you finished a round. Normally, obviously, you can go in just as we have done before and put a slip stitch in like that. Absolutely not a problem whatsoever. It's worked beautifully well for us to this point, but since we're now changing colour and our join might be perhaps a little bit easier to see, I thought I'd show you what we call needle join method. It's a really nice trick to have up your sleeve, and it will work in all crochet scenarios. So I've changed the way I do this a little bit since our videos. Both ways will work, but let's do a special version for you here in our Betty Beret videos. So I've finished my last stitch. I've cut the yarn and I'm actually going to just pull the yarn through. All right, so I've pulled it through, so the stitch isn't going anywhere because it is secure. But what it does mean is I have now kind of left myself short, because I should have had another little loop on the end there, which would have made when I made the slip stitch. But if I do what I was just doing there, you can see, if I kind of hold it round there, you can see that it would join nicely in a kind of continuous way if I could just find some magical way of turning this end into a loop. I am here to tell you people, you can find a magical way of doing that, and it isn't magic at all, it's really easy. You're going to need your bodkin, and you're just going to thread the end of your yarn onto it thus. What I am then going to do is, where I would have put my slip stitch, which would have been in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically go over the top of that stitch with my yarn here. I'm going to follow the shape of this stitch, which is where I was going to put my slip stitch. I'm going to follow the shape of this stitch with this yarn, and you will see what happens when I do that. So if I take my little needle here and I go, right, where's that stitch going? Where's that yarn going? It's going along, 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 along. Then it goes under. So if I put my needle under, when I pull my yarn through, it's going to follow that line. All right, don't pull it too tight. Okay, so coming back now, if my stitch has come from under here, where my yarn is now coming, if I follow it with my needle again, follow, 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 it actually needs to go into the top of this one to kind of complete. Can you see how this little braided look is happening? To complete that kind of braided look, I need to put it into a stitch, and I'm going to put the yarn back into the stitch from whence it came, to create that little braided yarn appearance. But before I do that, if I just pull that through there, great, it's going to be fine, but it's going to be a little bit loose. That stitch is going to hang a little bit loose. So what I'm actually going to do, if I tilt this towards you a bit, you can see where that stitch is disappearing. I'm going to put my needle in there. So I have truly kind of followed the line of that stitch that I am trying to magically mimic. And when I pull my yarn not too tight, let me hold that out of the way, you literally cannot see that join. Okay, if I go around like that, you just can't see it. You can find it, obviously, if you look close enough you can find it, but I think that's a pretty good join to sort of hide the end of our crown, or the outermost of our centre crown here. Don't worry that it's bulging a bit. Don't worry about that at all, because blocking at the very end is going to take complete care of that. I'm just I'm concerned with the fact that you've got a nice, neat centre 4 rounds, and we're going to just flip this over and deal with our end just by weaving that end in. Doesn't need to go too mad, this, because it is pure wool. When you block it at the end, when you wet it, these ends will felt slightly, which means they will be held onto nice and tightly, so you don't need to go, like I said, too overboard on weaving your end in at the back either. All in, wool is a beautiful, beautiful material to be working with. Okay, so that's the end dealt with. We are now ready to change colour and use some buttermilk.